possibly the definitive moment in South Africa's mining industry, and some might argue the South African economy this year, would be the Marikana massacre. It really shaped the questions that we're asking ourselves around inequality, around unemployment, and around poverty. So just to get a sense of what it all means for the mining industry, we're chatting to Finweek's David Mckay. David, thank you so much for your time today. Is it overstating to say it was really a definitive moment?
No, not at all. I think what that event did was brought together a lot of the discontents that have been in the mining sector almost forever, ever since we've had a mining sector. What it certainly did is it threw into relief the fact that the government's legislative efforts had not taken the country forward as they would have hoped. The centrepiece of minerals legislation was promulgated in 2004, and the idea of it was to introduce equality into the system. 7 years later, 8 years later, we're in a situation where people are in the streets protesting, ostensibly about wages, but about so much else. I think Marikana also spoke to the issue of migrant labour, to the hostile situation. And then perhaps more worryingly to the ineffectiveness of the labour movement to actually cater to the needs of the miners.
I think it sort of exposed some gaps in the companies, the gaps in government legislation, the gaps in the labour movement as well. Everybody had to ask themselves specific questions.
And it was a single event that brought together processes that have been underway for the last 19 years. And it depends what time perspective you apply in order to understand what went down. If you're looking at it over the last 6 months, it's a very complex and intertwined situation, alchemy of pressures and whatnot. If you look at it over the longer term, it's about upliftment of people. It's about delivery and the ability of our government to deliver. And I think looked in that time perspective, it gives you a kind of a different picture, perhaps more clarity.
When you speak to critics, to analysts, to people who follow the mining industry quite closely, when it comes to legislation, what are they saying? Are they saying that a piece of legislation promulgated in 2004 should be thrown out, baby bathwater situation? Is there something wrong with how we've been legislating?
Look, I mean, the mining legislation was the first. The mining charter was the first charter of its type. And in any kind of pioneering situation, there are issues with it, It's certainly, I think what people are coming to understand is that the mining legislation does not comply in the same way as other empowerment-related legislation does in terms of DTI-type guidelines, the triple BEE, where the focus is not on critical targets in terms of equity transformation. And what I'm talking about in practical terms is the mining charter and the mining legislation that frames it talks about thou shalt have 26% transformation by a date. And I think more later legislation, which is more mature in many respects, doesn't talk about absolute targets. It talks about transformation at the lower levels. And the mining charter and the mining legislation never did that. And I think that's what Marikana has shown us.
We have to talk nationalisation. That's been almost a scaremongering tactic in the sector over the past, I would say, probably 2 or 3 years since the emergence of Julius Malema, former ANC Youth League president. That then led to the investigation, the SIMS report and so on. What's your assessment of the SIMS report? Is it a helpful report in this broader debate?
The SIMS report's an odd piece of writing. Because it brings together a lot of different things. There's nothing unique about it. It's got, it's the curate's egg, cliche. It has a lot of good things in it, and it has a lot of poorly written things in it as well. I'm not sure if increasing taxes necessarily does the trick, Look, nationalisation as a whole, I think, has been pretty much buried by the ANC. I think they've very skillfully commandeered the argument away from the Youth League into its own processes. And so what they've said is that we're not going to have wholesale nationalisation, but we will have selective nationalisation. If you think of what they want to do in terms of the energy sector. So government wants tighter controls over the way coal is developed, the way it's exported and marketed so as to secure cheaper coal for Eskom, and that's seen as a national imperative. So they've taken that element of the nationalisation debate and kind of transformed it and commandeered it to their own uses.
Well, platinum and gold sectors have been obviously hogging the headlines, but what about the other metals and the other commodities in South Africa? How are we doing there?
I think the other metals are our future, to a large extent. I think the platinum industry is a long-term future for South Africa. Let me state that up front. Yeah. The gold industry is pretty much mature. The so-called bulk commodities, as they're described in the mining sector, these are the things that are mined in huge volume. Coal and iron ore probably represent our future. The manganese industry, to some extent, is the same. Iron ore, manganese, and coal all go into making steel. Yeah. They obviously, if they can be beneficiated, would lead to significant industrialization of the South African economy. And I think there's a lot of future in that. There's also future in the fact that we have pockets of excellence in terms of skills in South Africa that can be exported north. And I'm talking of the consulting engineers, the due diligence skills that we have that can be taken into the further reaches of Africa, where there is a lot of primary mining going on. And we're seeing legal profession as another skill that can be taken north, and we're seeing that already.
All right. Thanks for your time today.
Pleasure.
David Mckay is with FinWeek.